Castlevania is a long-running series, and throughout its 35-year run has had the opportunity to introduce compelling characters. Whether protagonists or antagonists, some of these characters have become staples and fan favorites, other than those in the Belmont clan or Dracula himself. But what about the characters that people don't seem to gravitate towards? The ones that people find boring or they simply detest? Characters like Carmilla, whom is a returning character from the franchise but has a drastically new approach in the Netflix animated series. An approach that made her kind of unbearable to like or even listen to. Well, at least for me that's the case. But even though I couldn't find myself to like her as an antagonist, unlike Isaac or Varney, can't really deny that her role was fitting as one of the main villains in the story. So in order to fulfill the majority of petitions to do a character analysis for her, in this video, I'm going to objectively and carefully examine her character and try to figure why she's such a goddamn Karen. As previously stated, Carmilla as a character is not new to Castlevania, being one of the servants to Dracula and an antagonist to the Belmont clan. Making her first appearance in the gaming series in Castlevania II Simon's Quest, appearing as a giant flying mask with a hollow opening for the right eye, a gem on the other, with a bloody tear dropping from it. It wasn't until Rondo of Blood that she finally took the form of a humanoid, but the catch was, she is nude. Of course. In the next few titles she returns in, would have her keep this form of being in a nude and riding a giant skull with little to no character development or significance other than being a boss battle, and being nude. Up until Castlevania Judgment, where we actually see her have some sort of personality, and she was just half naked this whole time.
I'll enjoy this.
Her next probably biggest incarnation was in the Lords of Shadow series, where she took a major role shift in being one of the three main antagonists and the Queen of the Vampires, preceding the coming of the most powerful of her kind to ever exist, Dracula. In a twist of events that would have her role to be pitted against Gabriel Belmont in the first game, who kinda ends up being Dracula in the sequel, and she is in opposition to him again in the second game. God damn, I miss playing that game. Lords of Shadow was such a well-crafted arc. Maybe I can do a retrospective on the story and review of the titles for you guys down the line. Just let me know in the comments if y'all down. Then in 2018, she made her reappearance in season 2 of the Netflix animated series, and as soon as she made her fashionably late entrance, I knew she was about trouble. Having the gall to insult the court, and then proceed to question the motive of Dracula's personal decisions as a form of counsel, as she puts it. A decisive risk at angering the apex being of her mighty species. For all her audacity and being direct and shady, I must admit that she is clever in setting opportunities and traps. Asking such a direct question of Dracula and triggering his temper could have went two ways. The first would be that Dracula could have lost control, and as a result, would have obliterated Carmilla on sight to make an example of her to the other generals. Yet in doing this, will put Dracula in a peculiar position by potentially risking the trust of his generals and then being looked upon as inept to make logical, decisive moves in their campaign, which was already in questionable state to the vampires of the High Court anyway. They just knew better to be so bold. The second way would garner her the opportunity to have a personal counsel with Dracula, to explain her motives in asking such a daring question, while alienating and leaving the rest of the generals to their petty squabbles. Luckily, her gamble landed the latter, as Dracula proceeds to have her come speak with him in his personal quarters. Yet even in his anger, Dracula is too seasoned to fall for such a low blow showcase. Carmilla, now in the thick of her decision, understands the high risk of being eliminated from the chessboard after this, evident by how she scopes the area and observes what she is walking into in Dracula's study. Even though her main entrance may have given insight to her character as someone separated from the pack, it was her instinctual actions and words went along with the alpha that allowed me to understand who and what she represents at the core. Her immediate greet to Dracula's summoning was reminiscent of a privileged woman who does not believe she can do wrong. Yet with one look, she is reminded of her position and conforms to the hierarchy. Understanding that such behavior does not work well in a man with self-respect and standards. When Dracula confronts her on her dramatic entrance, she immediately tells on herself,
"It was not meant to disrespect you. It was intended to unsettle a room full of men. I prefer in such situations to arrive with as many advantages as possible.
But why would she need to do that? Unless she has a problem with men. Even though it's the demographic that her lord and superior belongs to. Now with this response, Dracula can calmly observe, interrogate, and counter when necessary. As Dracula gets to the bottom of how she was able to be here by keeping in contact with Godbrand, she reveals that Godbrand would like the opportunity to sleep with her, and when Dracula asks if she would oblige,
From another man that would be impossible impertinence.
Telling that she is either not enamored with the opposite sex, or refrains to out of self-respect, stating that she would only consider it should all the vampire males have the females and animals were to drop dead. Poor Godbrand. Thus creating the opportunity to ask about her impertinence for denouncing Dracula's dead wife. Carmilla remains steadfast with rhetoric and alibis for her actions. Dracula understands that she is scheming, but it's no different from the other generals in their personal motives, so he sends her away. The way that she stopped and smirks after leaving gives an indication that she took this interaction as a win. Carmilla as a character has always been a somewhat powerful, scheming seductress, when she's fleshed out, that is. Even from the gothic folklore origins that inspired her development in Castlevania, a vampiress who often possesses lesbian traits, and her victims tend to be exclusively female. Yet, ironically throughout the game series, her sexual preference seems to have been flipped, taking on the role of a powerful succubus who seduces men and loves to make flirtatious gestures and remarks.
Man or woman, can no one satisfy me?
In a Netflix anime, Carmilla's personality seems to take more influence from the gothic novella, The Dark Blue, while keeping her ferocious combat abilities from her previous incarnation in the Lords of Shadow series, with extremely pale skin, long thin silver hair, and having the magical ability to control the element of lightning. Even though her character is reminiscent of her folklore origins, it has been tweaked in the anime to appeal and reflect a modern-day feminist extremist. Given the fact that she only finds value in the female gender, and often you would see her in a combative state, seducing, manipulating, belittling, and one-upping men to her advantage. Not just any man, but men who pose a threat, a natural competitor, and a man of power. Evident in how she takes over the conversation whenever possible at the end of episode 2. You can even see her contempt for the male gender once she explains her backstory to Godbrand about the man who turned her centuries ago. How he grew old and mad, therefore she sees Dracula in the same path. I suspect that even before being turned into a vampire, that she was a possessive and insolent Karen. Given the fact that the same vampire count who turned her promised her the world, and when he didn't deliver, she took everything from him, including his life. This man-hating attribute seems to fuel her purpose of obtaining absolute power, and for all her flaws, Carmilla is extremely clever in using her opponent's weaknesses to her advantage, using Godbrand's savagery, insatiable lust for blood, and sexual attraction to her to try and convince the two men who can't be wowed by her advances, Isaac and Dracula, taking her time to slowly stroke Hector's ego while preying on his gullible and indecisive attitude. I was really impressed by how she orchestrated and meticulously planned Hector's betrayal of Dracula. It took my second rewatch of season 2 to realize how she planned for Hector to reanimate the dead bishop that blessed the river to turn it into holy water, which decimated Dracula's forces at Rayla. By keeping in contact with Godbrand, his babbling mouth would keep her abreast of whereabouts of Dracula's castle, plus give stat reports of victories and casualties during the war effort. For it's Godbrand who seems to be in charge of reporting news on the battlefront and bringing back proper corpses for the Forge Masters to reanimate and perform autopsy. With this in mind, it is possible that Godbrand informed Carmilla of recovering the dead body of the Bishop of Greshet, and that his remains were given to Hector, giving her the idea to prey on Hector's indecisiveness and planting doubt in his mind about Dracula's leadership, leading to Hector siding with Carmilla while proceeding to have him convince Isaac and Dracula to attack Rayla, where a river port is present. Once the seeds have been planted and her plan comes to fruition, Hector, under the order of Carmilla, reanimates the bishop in order to turn the river into holy water. Clever Karen, yo. Literally turned the generals and Hector into her puppets. Ogun's beard. Fucking Hector is such a dumbass. Unfortunately, Her plans were soiled by Sypha, Alucard, and Trevor, but luckily for her, because regardless of how powerful Carmilla and her sisters think they are, Dracula would have creamed them in a fight. Not to mention a Belmont, a Speaker, and a Tepesh also would have stood in her way in the end. But even with her plans interrupted, she found an advantage. With Hector now as her captive, she'll have the means to replenish her forces to make up for the numbers she lost. After a month of walking and dragging Hector back to Styria, it has come to the realization that her plan, which involved taking out Dracula, has destabilized the order structure of the known world. Her plan was not as foolproof as she thought it was. Yet even in their state of fractured might, here come Carmilla scheming with a plan to gain more power and foothold in Europe. Thinking that Hector will make her night creatures, after confusing him, helping her betray his master, beating the piss out of him, dragging him 800 miles in chains, locking him up naked, and then feeding him rotten food. Without Marana explaining this to her, she would have continued in her aggressive tactics, thinking torture would have persuaded him to do as she suggests. So while Lenore does her thing to tame poor old simp Hector, Striga discusses with Carmilla the issue with beating Hector and requiring him to create night creatures. Carmilla responds, of course, with Hector needing to be cowed, as if there's no error in her ways. Striga reinforces Carmilla's questionable plan by reminding her,
"Where do we get that many fresh dead bodies from? Without reducing our feeding stock to nothing."
As usual, Carmilla redirects to Lenore and gives a runaround for not having a solution. Once Lenore lays her trap on Hector, at the round table, they continue to discuss the future efforts. After countless nights of Striga trying to make things work, Marana gives her solution to her dilemma, leading to Striga stating that she's a genius. Yet immediately after, Carmilla interjects to state that it was her idea, showing that she is unable to give the glory to another. It's kind of funny how these four sisters who are against Castlevania's patriarchy allow the sister who exudes the most toxic form of femininity to lead the charge. In the final season, we come to Lenore and Carmilla talking about Hector. After Striga and Marana have been away securing distant lands for weeks, Lenore's boredom brings her to Carmilla's chambers, working on territorial maps of Europe. Once Lenore mentions,
"Please, would Dracula have kept him around in his own castle if he were that dangerous?"
I would have liked that castle.
as if she doesn't own her own that she's sitting in right now. She then exclaims taking things from stupid evil old men is what she does. I mean, listen to this scene.
That land and those villages and towns belong to old men. All of them. And I'm going to take them. This castle belonged to a stupid, evil old man. I took it. The land from here to Brela, ruled by stupid old men, devastated by one single stupid old man.
Wait a minute. I feel like I've heard this sort of rhetoric before.
Kill male babies and just kill any man that you see, like in the streets, like any swinging dick, just kill him. Because we want the species to go on, but we want it only to go on with women in it.
Yo, this Karen has serious dick envy. So when Lenore asks if she will be happy after all this is done, she goes into a rant and rampage again about men, and then exclaims that she will take the world. Once she finally calms down a bit, she'll answer the question that she doesn't even know or thinks that she even cares, but she'll have the world, and she wants it all, and that they'll all be dead. Then the day came where all good things come to an end. Isaac attacked. Carmilla, in a beautiful display of her combat abilities, we saw her kill and dismantle hordes of night creatures, leaving the floor of her chambers and the path leading to them flooded with blood. If there is one thing I can give Carmilla, other than her cleverness, is that her will is strong. Even when facing death at the hands of Isaac and his night creatures, she is defiant and unrelenting, even as to go so far to self-destruct rather than give her foe the satisfaction of killing her. It's always a pretty badass way to go.
I am Carmilla of Styria, and fuck you! I win.
Carmilla is an interesting villain. I choose to label her as a villain over antagonist because there seem to be no redeeming qualities about her. Yet, I won't deny that she is an end result of sexism and the abuse of power in the Castlevania universe, creating a monster that sees herself and her demographic as a potential oppressed group in contrast to the opposite gender of her species, being overwhelmed with hatred making her operate in extremes while overshadowing the privilege and advantages gained from being a member of the vampire race, leading to her ambitions guiding her towards an inevitable fate at the hands of a man hailing from a species she deemed to be weaker. Thank you for taking the time to watch my character analysis on Carmilla, and a special thanks goes to those who engaged in my community posts that enabled me to greenlight this video. What are everyone's thoughts on Carmilla? Do you think the direction the producers of the show took with her was well written? Do you think she was a worthy villain for the series? Drop your thoughts below in the comments, and don't forget to check out my previous Castlevania character analysis of Isaac, while also subscribing and hitting that bell. You know the vibes. It's Kaizoku Sleven. Appreciate you.